All right, welcome to our show, Unlocking Dyscalculia, and we have our guest today, Cara Scanlon. We're going to be talking all about math anxiety, but first I wanted to introduce Cara to you so that you get to know her and love her just as much as I do. So Cara is an educational therapist, and she's unique because she also has dyslexia herself. So she's endearing to students because she can relate on so many levels to them, which I just love about her. Cara and I have known each other for years now, which is crazy to say. It's been a long time. You have been such a big part of my journey in learning all of this cool stuff. Yes.
You're the one who got me virtual pre-COVID, which is insane.
You're welcome.
Oh, yes. No, you have no idea.
It's life-changing, right? The work can continue forward working online. So, Cara, tell us a little more about you and your background in ed therapy, and then we'll launch into chatting about math anxiety.
Well, most importantly about me, an Adrianne groupie. So I'm just going to start there. And the two of us like talking math, I think about the same amount, which is a whole lot. But you know, my day job is being an ed therapist, and my specialty is working with middle school, high school, college, and adult students with math. But really, my focus is math anxiety. And as we're going to end up talking about through this podcast, what that means and what math anxiety means. And I was at a store recently, and I actually gave the guy cash, which, you know, is kind of unusual these days. And he's like, "Oh, give me a sec. Like, I have to remember how to do this." And I was like, "Oh, I'm a math teacher. I can help you if you want." And he froze, like probably started shaking, and then ended up giving me $20 extra. And I was like, "I don't think this is right." And he's like, and I was like, just saying I was a math teacher got him in such a panic, he could not give me the right change. And I think just from that example, just shows you how people feel about math, how, you know, learning in a school environment when it's not conducive to your brain, just what it can do to you years later.
Like years later, still, it never fails when someone hears I'm a math teacher and then they hear how I teach math. Someone will pull me to the side and say, "I still can't calculate a tip." Or if I'm in the store and there's a sale, I don't know how much is being taken off. Like they're like so filled with shame and like, I don't know what to
judge
do.
me. I still use my fingers. And I'm like, "I do too. It's okay." And they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah." That's why they're here. Like, legitimately, that's why they're here.
That's why they're here. And that's what they're based on. Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. And so you've been doing ed therapy for how many years now?
Formally for, I want to say like 9 years, but I've been teaching math to students for 17 years. My senior year in high school, the dean of students pulled me aside and was like, "You get here to school early. Why don't you help classmates in math?" And I was like, "I don't know." And then I just started, like, I set up tent and people started coming. And I'll tell you this one story because it does have to do with math anxiety.
Yeah.
So I was a senior. I think she was a sophomore. I can't remember. We had played a sport together, or we had done something. We had socialized a bit. And she's like, "I can't do math." She sits down and is like, "Here's this problem. I can't do math." And I'm like, "Okay, well, like, when you see this problem, what do you think?" And she's like, "Well, this is what I tried, and it's wrong." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, explain it to me." And she's going through the problem. She gets to the end. She gets the problem completely correct. And she goes, "See, I can't do it." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "See, it's the wrong answer." And I'm like, "That's the right answer." And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, you did everything correctly. You did that. You solved the equation correctly. You plug back in, blah, blah, blah. It's all correct." And she's like, "Oh." And I'm like, "Uh-huh. Do you want to do another problem?" She's like, "No, I think I got it then." I was like,
Wow. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, so that was like my first introduction to math anxiety, and specifically in girls. Yes. And like the socialization around not being good, and like the social acceptableness of not being good in math and being able to say, "I'm not good at math."
Yes, absolutely. And the stories that go along with that for yourself too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
your
things that you
self-talk
start
and all of
saying.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that was
totally.
my first student, my senior year that I
I
worked with.
love that. I love that. You have a strong future in this field.
Yeah.
So before we met, I sent you this article here, and I know all of you at home can't read it, but I'll share it with you. So it came from Frontiers in Psychology, and it's research done, and it's called Math Anxiety Mediates or Makes a Connection to the Link Between Number Sense and Math Achievements and High Math Anxiety Young Adults. So these are the people you work with day in and day out.
Mhm.
I really liked the article because it confirmed a lot of things that I think you and I have observed, that we've
Mhm.
experienced, but no one had really studied. So we know from this research, it's saying math anxiety is multidimensional. So I want to hear from you, what ways are you seeing that it's manifesting in students, from the physical to the psychological and their ability to reflect?
Well, and one thing I did want to point out, like now we've got an acronym. We're MA. We're
Yeah,
beyond math anxiety. We're MA. Oh my gosh.
that's right. The article's using MA as a way to describe it. Does this
And I
student
think
have
it's
MA?
super important to realize the intensity of this. And I do think it's something that is diagnosable in like that first story that I told you about, that person, that adult just clamping up so intensely. And so what I like to say explain it, when your brain gets that anxious, it just impairs your working memory and you shut down. And so your normal ability to think through problems is just gone. Your normal ability to hold pieces of information, gone. And so like the article talked about, upset stomach, panic attacks, poor recall, sweaty palms, like that fight, flight, or freeze situation going on, and then increased heart rate. And when any of those things happen, you get anxious, and then you can get into panic attack mode. And if you don't have something grounding you or something bringing you back, and I think I've talked, like over my career, I've talked to many people, like people who are allied professionals, who are other ed therapists, who, just parents or just lay people, about, these physical responses to math or what my job is. And people are like, that's only for the rich, like if you're poor, you don't have time for that. And I think that in some respects is true. Like when you're fight or flight, where like, I just need food, or I need shelter, or I need clothing, or I need water, and that's it. And then you don't have that, whatever, you don't have time to think about anything further, because you're on Maslow's hierarchy, you're just right there.
Yes.
But when you start to have those needs met, and then you can go up Maslow's hierarchy, then you get to these experiences where, yeah, school can be incredibly traumatic. And that trauma that your body holds, just like the scarcity of food and the trauma your body holds from that, your brain doesn't know the difference. That, like, you can die not having food, and you're not going to die about your ability to learn math.
Right.
But your brain doesn't know that. Your amygdala isn't thinking about that.
Can't
so
see
these
it.
these trauma responses can be really intense, and your brain is just going to kick into that fight or flight mode, and all the physical manifestations of it. And then you're shut, like your body is just shut down.
Absolutely.
And your body holds that for years if you don't unpack it and you don't find a safe place to learn your math.
Yes, absolutely. And I think along those same lines, we're seeing kids shutting down. They're saying things like, I can't do this, I'll never learn this, I'm stupid. They feel like completely defeated. Or they'll resort to saying like math is stupid, like they're trying to protect themselves from the angsty clause.
I don't ever
math.
need to know this.
Right.
Why did we have to learn this?
This is pointless. When will I ever use this? Yeah. And those kind of attitudes can be pervasive too, from that anxiety that comes from mathematics.
Exactly. And so this is slightly different. This is more from an ADHD perspective. When you have extreme when you have ADHD that goes untreated or unsupported, then the extremes become suicide, or inward violence with suicide, outward violence with jail time, or hurting, like physically hurting other people. And those are very extreme. And that, I'm not saying that's always what happens with people with ADHD, but when you're not supported, there's these two avenues. And I think that in that, like mental regard, it's you either go inward and you have this crippling feeling of unworthiness, and that's where a lot of anxiety comes from, but in an inward one, or like you don't reach out for help, you don't ask people, and you just crawl inside yourself, or you externalize and you blame other people and you push it on other people instead. And that those are both very damaging. And if you can't find a safe place to learn where you have a nurturing environment, and you keep on having these traumas around learning, like academic trauma after academic trauma, you're going to create these kids. I've worked with two separate young men who I was legitimately worried about them taking a gun into school. And not because like who they are morally as a human being, they're very good people. The academic traumas that they were experiencing over and over and over again, and no one was helping them. And, the ways they were crying out for help, they could have used their words, but they didn't know how to because of the overlaying trauma.
Yep.
And I feel lucky enough to have worked with those two young men and help them see the avenues for resources, so that they could realize this is how I ask for help in a way that people will help me. And one kid, I hold him dear to my heart because I just hope he's okay. And one of them, I know he's okay. And I know the change I saw in him over the year that I worked with him. And that anger outwards really dissolved into, I'm going to ask for help because my teacher is not doing this correctly.
Yeah.
But creating the words to go to the learning specialist, creating the words to go to the teacher and say, like, this doesn't make sense, instead of other ways of acting out.
Yeah.
But that's where I think when people might kind of dismiss the importance of math anxiety, is there are these extreme things that happen when you are put in this continual trauma. Like it isn't, like one big stab, it's like a 10,000 paper cuts, and that 10,000th paper cut can really just be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know it's a real thing. You and I have both seen it in various forms, from a kid putting a blanket over their camera, thinking that will solve the problem. They can't see me anymore. Or a kid, vomiting in the other room because they don't want to be doing this work. They're scared, they're terrified, or, anyways, we know it's a real thing. So where do you think the source of these anxieties come from? We've talked about trauma a little bit, but what else? And we can refer to this a little bit too. Like, where else is it generating from?
Well, I think the way the school system works currently, it's not, the priority isn't having a safe, consistent, calm learning environment. And for a lot of different reasons. And I'm not saying like teachers are the reason, like not at all. Like administration's the reason, not at all. Between the funding that we have for public and private schools, between the respect society has for teachers nowadays, there's just this, it's a very layered problem. And when the work that I used to do in Kenya, I would see these little like 3-year-olds out working the flocks of goats, and like in the United States, like the parent would be put in jail for neglect of their child. And so just talking to some of the parents and some of the elders about like, why do you do this? Why do you have the kids be by themselves tending to some animals? And a friend of mine was like, oh, they're not by themselves. You see the fathers over there, like half a mile away, watching their child, seeing how they're doing, and they'll come intervene if they need, but they're teaching them from afar how, like, responsibilities and expectations and all these things. And each year that they get older, they have more expectations of what they should be able to do, but they are nurtured and mentored into how to do that. And recently I saw something about, like in the wild, you don't see like a huge flock of children with one animal. It's usually like a community around them. And like talking about elephants or giraffes or lions, like, yeah, you have a brood of kids typically, but there's usually more adults than there are kids. And so that ratio is just very different.
Yeah.
And like an African proverb, and I can't remember which country it originated from, but it's a lot of elders, especially in Kenya, that I heard them talking is, we don't teach kids unless they show us they deserve it. And a lot of these very ancient mathematical concepts that we have from Egypt, like how even the pyramids were built and things like that, we still speculate and don't truly understand how, but that's because over generations, elders didn't deem the next generation or people from the next generation worthy of taking on that knowledge. And so that's, and I'm not saying like no one should be educated unless they're deserving. What I'm saying is, when someone's ready to learn, they deserve to learn. So like some people aren't ready to learn at a certain point. That doesn't mean that they're never ready to learn. It just means like, this is not the time. You need to show respect to the content that you want to learn. And a lot of the kids I get, they have no respect for math because no one sat down and created a calm, nurturing environment for them to understand why they should learn. A lot of my students are not interested in math, and that's totally fine with me. Like one of my kids, after working with me for 4 years, was like, I tolerate math now. I don't like it. I'm sorry, but I don't hate it anymore, Cara. Thank you. And I was just like, oh.
That's a huge win.
It is. And to get to that, to shift that mindset and to get, like, this is a kid who had a lot of trauma and was externalizing, and really to come back in himself and be like, you know what, not my favorite subject, but I see the point of it and I understand the importance of it. And now I've learned it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting, like the article was pointing out that some possible explanations, and I'll just look at my cheat sheet here.
Yeah. See, well, I just want to show Adrianne's modeling. She read, she took notes. See, this is a skill that they teach you in school, and it is actually useful in real life.
It really is, because if you've ever read research, like the language is like so much higher, right? And so I like have a dictionary out. I'm like making notes and changing the words to something I can relate to. So consider me, you know, the dumbing down for you all here. But one thing I really like too, like not only is it about the environment, like, yes, I totally agree. Like we've created these environments where it's difficult for kids to even have like authentic learning experiences, but they're also citing that some of it's just hardwired. Like kids come with a lower ability to reason mathematically. They have like an impaired approximate number system, or ANS, right? So that means they don't have very good number sense. They're not very good spatial skills. So that's one reason. But also from what you were saying, like just the anxiety itself around the topic causes the low performance. And what I like about it is that they're not pointing fingers at like the teachers stink at teaching. They're saying, no, like these are two things that reside within the individual that are causing these issues. And so I thought that was really good. And so you've talked like a little bit about various things you've done to help solve math anxiety, but I would love to hear more about, you know, maybe throw in a story or two, but what are some ways we can treat math anxiety? What's some stuff that parents could take away, maybe try out with their child?
Yeah. And I mean, we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but you know, like I had a student that came to me who was diagnosed with ADHD, anxiety, and dyscalculia. And for this particular student, I don't think she had dyscalculia. I think it was between her ADHD and anxiety, but it was presenting strongly enough that the numbers in the report and in the tests that were done showed dyscalculia. And so that's where, you know, like sometimes like the two prongs where it's really this trauma or anxiety, math anxiety that creates the dyscalculia, or it's impaired number sense, or like physically knowing like how to subitize versus various things that creates the dyscalculia. And so this particular student, after 3 months of working with her and just getting her trauma response really unpacked, where she didn't, like when I first met her, I would literally read a question to her and she'd be like, I can't do it. To like, I don't remember, like, I don't know the equation. It's like, okay, well, let's find the equation. Okay, now you know the equation. It's like, okay, I can't remember what to do. Okay, and so that happened in that 3 months. And so she, like the school, like I was kind of like, I don't know if she got tested now, I don't think she would have gotten a dyscalculia diagnosis. But it did mean that the school allowed me to work with her during the school day. And in that sense, I think it was really, really important that she did get a formal diagnosis for dyscalculia.
Absolutely.
And after working with her for 3 years, because after 3 months, I kind of told the parents, like, I think she's kind of good. Like, we've unpacked a lot of the trauma. She's willing to sit in her class. She's decreased her, like, she's increased her frustration level with math, so she can sit in frustration for longer. And the parents were like, no, we can't, like, gotta sit. And I, like, every 6 months I would say this to the family. So after 3 years, they were finally like, I think we're good. And in that time, she went from like a millisecond of frustration that she could handle in math to about, I want to say 7 to 10 minutes she could sit with a problem. And that's a huge life skill. But when you're in such a trauma response, being able to sit in that discomfort is so painful. And a lot of the work that I do with my students is around like breathing with them and getting them to calm down their bodies and their breath and their minds, just regrounding them. So I do a lot of conversations about what their interests are. Like, I know more about Bitcoin and trains than I think I will ever need to, like, just ever. And I'm not upset about that. Like, these kids were just super into that. And I'm like, down, I learned something I would have never learned otherwise. But that is, that was their happy place to talk about those things. And then they're in that state, that feeling in their body when they're talking about their happy things, and then to go back and talk to math, like about math. And so they're calm in their body, and then they can start talking about the thing that causes them anxiety. And over time, they can keep that feeling of calm and safety in their body while they talk about math. For some of my kids, it's like walking around with them. Like, virtually, that's a little different. But encouraging parents to various forms of exercise and letting kids fidget. Like, I have a girl who like will spin like kind of intensely in her chair, like in circles, like major vestibular stimulation going on. Like, and mom, when she comes in, is like, "What are you doing?" And I'm sitting there like, I don't need her to do that as long as she's responding to me. So it doesn't look like learning in the traditional sense, but she is learning, and she is retaining information, and sometimes better because she's doing that. Like, sometimes, and this particular child has ADHD, so like for her brain, it is actually kind of really helpful that she can do that.
For sure.
But yeah, like, however, those kids need to be regrounded. And I know for like my sensory input, getting big hugs, or the sensory input through hugs, or through like what I like to call bear hugs, where it's just a pressure, just a lot of pressure. And, like, as a teacher, we can't really do that, but parents can, or kids can do that to themselves when they need to self-soothe. That, like, those little sensory things can be really important. I'm like, actually, a friend of mine made this for me. So it's a paper crane. And she put like the puffy foam shirt paint on the bottom. So it's kind of pokey, like not like sharp pokey, but like, and this is kind of my sensory toy when I'm feeling overwhelmed. Like, again, being virtual is really nice, so you would never know that I was doing this, but like, just having that sensory input, because for me with my ADHD, I'm having too much sensory or not enough sensory input, and I'm off balance. And so to like get more sensory input can sometimes be really, really helpful in grounding.
Yes, I love these tips. And I'm finding like I'm doing the same kind of thing, that co-regulating with breathing with them. When we've been in this moment of panic attacks, I've got a kiddo that will have a panic attack out of nowhere. And same thing, like it's just figuring out how to breathe. So for him, sometimes he has to put his head on my chest and feel it going up and down, and we breathe together. And he's not making eye contact. That just makes it even harder for him.
Yeah, too much sensory input.
So that's another tip too, like for homework, when we're helping my kiddo, we don't do homework sitting across the table from each other. We sit side by side so he can't see my face.
Yeah,
because there is moments where I'm like, I don't remember how to do this. And he doesn't read this correctly. And so he thinks I'm mad.
Yep.
Not mad, just don't remember. Right? I need a minute. Give me a minute. And so if we sit side by side, that helps. But if he starts to get triggered and overly emotional, yeah, it goes into breathing. Let's go for a walk. Let's get a drink. Let's stand up for a little bit. Take a break. Like there's no point in
A
sitting
fresh
there when you're
brain will
triggered.
work better.
Yeah.
So if you're triggered, like a fresh brain is going to just work so much more efficiently
much
than
more
an
efficient.
oversaturated, triggered brain.
Absolutely. Yes. So we'll go outside, we'll throw some basketball hoops. And I know that sounds crazy because as a parent, there's also times where I'm like, I don't have time for this garbage. Like, please just sit down and get your work done. And I'm mad, like, just get it done. If you would just stop your belly aching, we could have been done by now. However, really, if I buckle down and just lean into these anxiety mitigation, tips, it really
It will
does
actually
go
be
better.
faster. Yeah,
Yes,
it will
it
actually
really
be
does.
faster. And
Instead of
and I think
colliding.
that modeling from a parent perspective, I think is really important. I was talking to my bestie from first grade today, and she's just moved back to the US from Hong Kong because of some challenges that are going on there. Her husband's still working Hong Kong time. Her dad is not used to having two young boys in the house. He only had daughters. And she was like, I think of my two sons as colleagues. And, like, you don't yell at your colleagues. You are emotionally regulated with your colleagues and you help them emotionally regulate too. And I thought that was such a great perspective, like when you're starting to feel stress. And don't get me wrong, I am not always peachy keen to live with, for sure. Sure, you could ask my ex-husband questions and he'd happily respond. But like trying your best to okay, I'm feeling this way. How do you think my kid's feeling? Like this is, and remembering this is the biggest stress that they've figured out in their life. Like my little nephew who was born 2 months ago, like the worst thing in his world is that poopy diaper. Like that is literally legitimately the worst thing he has ever experienced in his life. And just remembering like, oh yeah, that's where he is. And I just need to meet him there. Like no poopy diapers for this boy. Okay.
Yeah, let's take care of that.
And I think
that's great. Yeah. No, and so lastly, the other thing I'm sure there's educators maybe watching this. What could we encourage them to do in the classroom to help these kiddos that might either A, be suffering in silence because they're kind of in a freeze type mode and they don't realize it, or B, they are suffering outwardly and you're annoyed with them. What are some ideas that teachers could try in their math classrooms to create that environment that creates more opportunity to show what they really know?
So one of the other big things of that also works with just helping people reground that I found really interesting was like a theme through working with my kids, just heightened during COVID. And it just listening and validating these kids' emotions. They probably don't have a lot of adults in their life that have time to listen and validate their emotions and to be honest about yours. Last night, one of my kiddos was like, it's so great to come to you. You're so calm. You always listen to me. I was like stressed out of my mind last night. And it was just so funny that my kiddo was like, that I was working with, the student was just like, you're so calm. And I just thank you. Like she was in the middle of a panic attack when she came into session, like literally holding back tears, like her eyes were just swelling up. And I just kept on telling her, it's okay to cry. Like, it's okay to have emotions. It's okay to cry. And I think the thing with that is like having kids verbalize how they're feeling or getting comfortable verbalizing how they're feeling. And then to let it's okay to have emotions. We can't dwell in that. We can't sit in that forever. We have to feel it and let go of it. But you need to be able to feel it and name it so you know what's going on and then let go of it. And I think that's something, like when I'm super honest with my kiddos about like, hey, I'm having a rough day. Like my dyslexia, like I can't spell letters right now. And we're doing, we're solving for variables and I'm writing A's instead of B's. Like we're at this level today. And they'll just laugh and be like, okay, that's fine. And they'll help me. They'll help correct me. So I'm making sure that they're understanding what they're translating me and I'm making sure that they're understanding the math and modeling that with them. We're not always at our best. We can't always be the calm, guide in the room. But if you, even when I worked in a middle school and I told kids like, you know what, I'm having a really rough day, I'd have kids run up and give me hugs. Like I've never met a lazy kid. I've never met a mean kid, like, but you got to communicate with them.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. It, like showing that compassion, the empathy, but like the action behind it, is really important. And then the other things I think that I've seen work well that I hear reported back from students of ours. I love it when I hear a teacher is providing students unlimited opportunities to retake tests. And that just takes a load off.
Like that
Oh my
anxiety level.
word. It's so fun to watch when those kinds of environments are created, how different students will approach it. Once they get that anxiety regulated, they view the test differently. They start seeing it as it's a form of feedback. It's not a reflection on me and who I am as a person. It means I didn't understand this section. I needed help on that. I'm going to go get some help and come back and master it, right? I had a student that would even flunk it. She never came back with tears. Once we got it regulated, right, that anxiety, she would flunk it and be like, so clearly I don't understand this. What can we do to make it better? What did I miss? It was a standard-based thing. Like she didn't understand that she needed to show it this way. She was getting answers right, but not the way that they were being graded on. And so that's one cool thing.
Who get anxious when they hear unlimited retests. These kids don't want to be taking these tests 10 times. Don't worry. But when you say unlimited, like for the ADHD brain, when we have extended time, the reason we have extended time is because the fear around, which creates anxiety around the timedness of it, goes away. I used to finish my tests faster when I was in extended time than when I was in regular time, because the fear of not finishing was gone. I could just be. Absolutely. And so, like Adrianne's not saying that you need to have like 10 copies of every test ready, but just knowing that they can try a couple more times is going to be huge for them.
Absolutely. And I think you'll see work ethic completely change in students, and you're going to see the bell curve start happening and who really needs like some serious intervention. You'll see it happen.
And they'll usually ask for it too. Like the kids want it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a guy in Idaho who is running a research study on this, and he was showing us his like preliminary data of like how drastically it was changing. Just that simple act of you can take this test as many times as you want.
And in real life, that's really what happens. Like if you're a graphic designer and the customer doesn't like your product, you do another draft.
Try again. Yes, you get to try again. And then another really like quick win I think teachers could do, like they could go turn around and implement this tomorrow. When students are taking tests, don't allow them to walk up and turn it in. Everyone stays in their seat. This one teacher that I know in Idaho, on the very last page of the test, she draws like some weird squiggle. And then the kids turn it over. If they're done, they're like drawing on the squiggle, and it becomes this game to them, like who can make the funniest picture to turn into the teacher, right? But the other kids in the room are not aware that you're done with your test because people are still writing. It looks like they're still working.
Yeah,
they have no clue, right? And so it lowers again this like anxiety when you start seeing people going ahead of you and turning things in. And you're inside going,
I think a lot of people think math, like your ability to the speed at which you're able to do math is your intelligence around math, which is so not the case. Like real mathematicians have to spend hours pondering, days, months, years pondering questions. And so that speed that a lot of people think for like mad minutes and like just your math facts, let's go. That's starting to be taken away. And it's like, let's sit with the question. And then you get a cool reward at the end of the at the end of the assessment, like, oh, you can play a little.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's spot on. Yeah. So I think we've had a great conversation. I think we could like nerd out about this all afternoon. Like math anxiety is such a big topic, and there's several influencers on Instagram. Like you could check them out. I will link to them, in this video down below, so you can see, some of the people that are talking about it on a consistent basis, because it's real. It's not a made up thing. Kids genuinely want to do their best. Yes. Honestly, right? Yeah. That's been my experience. They want to.
I've never met a lazy kid. No. I've met kids with lots of trauma, but I've never met a lazy kid.
Yes, lots of trauma. And the best way for us to address that anxiety is, yes, let's look at the number sense. Let's see if that's causing the issue and address the math anxiety simultaneously at the same time is what this article recommends. And that's what I found to be true. Let's address both. That's what you're doing. That's the kind of work that we do. I love it. So Cara, let's wrap this up. Where can we tell people to connect with you if they want to learn more? You're such a dynamic person. Like you're involved with AET. Like
Oh yeah.
you're so
There's always
cool on
something
so many
going on with
levels.
me. Yeah. And if you want to talk rock climbing or just skateboarding, yeah, like lots of different things. But if you want to go to my website, Scanlon ET is an educational therapist.org. There's a contact page. There's a bit more about me and some programs that I use that if you're interested in to know like what trainings were effective for me for helping my clientele, that's all there. And then just, some fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I will link all of that up for everybody. And then lastly, total made for math move here. We love humor. We love especially math humor.
Adrianne has the best math pun jokes shirts ever. I have all
we
of
have very
them.
punny math shirts if you want to check them out in our shop.
I should have worn one today. What was I thinking?
Oh, I know.
I have them all in this room too.
Should have reminded you. I should have reminded you. But I told you to come to this call with a pun or a joke or whatever you want. What do you got for us?
Okay. So I was watching one of my favorite shows, and the character who was trying to impress like the brainy woman, he like pulls out this math joke. And so I'm going to explain a little bit at post the pun of why I think this is a really interesting math pun, because it's actually not correct, but it's fun to see how people respond to it in my mind. But his to impress the brainy woman's math pun was, is it just me or are all circles pointless? And I think that's hysterical because like, yes, there's no vertices in a circle. So what he was really talking about, there's like no vertices in a circle. But for me, I'm like, I think it's hysterical because circles have limitless points. There's like infinitely many points in a circle. But I think it's a cute pun, but there's like some cool math to unpack. So like with kids and with teachers, like it's a fun joke, but then you can learn some stuff while explaining it. Yes. Most people would tell you that if you have to explain the joke, it's not funny, but I disagree.
Oh, I love it. I'm so glad you shared that with us. Thanks for coming and being here with us, Cara.
Always. Just a little time with you is always fantastic.